Uh-oh. That's a bad start. Guess we're good. Okay.
This is this between us.
The number one podcast in the world.
This is
the JBU.Show featuring Austin
from the Miller Talk Podcast.
ALLAN,
The American Sincerist.
and now your host,
Cam Allen.
All right, how's it going, everybody? My name is Chris, and this is the JBU Show. Joining me today is my co-host from the Miller Talk Podcast, Austin. Austin, how are you doing?
Good. Hello, everyone.
And joining us both today is a special guest, Dr. Oliver Heydorn, an associate with the Ch Doughlas Institute. Did I get that correct?
That's correct.
Excellent. And you're going to talk to us about the Douglas Social Credit System today.
That's right.
All right. I appreciate you being here. We have been looking forward to this all week. And I know very little about what we're going to talk about today, which is what we're looking forward to, is you kind of laying it out for us and why. My biggest thing that I'm hoping to answer by the end of this is how, of course, this system works and is different from other social credit systems, but also how it is congruent with the American system of government and the Constitution. Learning, you sent me a whole host of videos to check out when we first started talking about this, and watching through those, there's a lot of great information and stuff, but a lot of questions came up too. And so as we kind of go through it, hopefully we'll answer some of those. But what let's start with this. What kind of got you into this, and why are you doing this?
Okay, fair. Good question. So about, I would say, 20 years ago, I was finishing my PhD in philosophy. And at that time, I had about $25,000 in student debt, which by today's standards is probably negligible. Nevertheless, for me, it was a big deal at the time. And there's an organization here in Canada called the Pilgrims of St. Michael, and they have been promoting Douglas social credit for many, many decades, I think starting in the 1930s. And sometimes they do mass mailings of the country. And so one day in the summertime, one of their leaflets arrived in my mailbox, and I read it, the whole thing. And I thought, I think they're onto something. And what shocked me the most, and this is really just the entry point for social credit, but what shocked me the most to learn was the fact that the bulk of our money supply in any country, it doesn't matter, it's created in the form of intangible bank credit whenever private banks make a loan or a purchase, right? So very often people think of money, they think of it in physical terms, coins, bills, something tangible, and they think, well, that's money. But actually, the bulk of the money supply is invisible. It exists on bank balance sheets. And every time they make a loan, that's a liability. And in the asset column, you've got intangible numbers that correspond to the size of the debt.
Right.
So this is quite shocking because I had $25,000 in student loans, and it was interesting to learn that this money that was lent to me was not money that other people had deposited in the bank, which the bank had then lent to me. Mm-hmm. It was money that they had created, right, in the act of lending. And they wanted, I can't remember exactly what the interest rate was, but I think if I were to pay it off the way that they intended, I was going to pay, so many thousands of dollars in interest. And that didn't seem to be very equitable considering the origin of the money. So that was sort of my entry into it. I paid off the loan as quickly as I could in order to minimize the interest payments.
Mm-hmm.
But Douglas social credit is actually about things that are far more profound than just this question of, who creates the money supply under what conditions. Nevertheless, it's something that even today, I think a lot of people are unaware of where the money supply comes from, and even politicians don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
As shocking as that is. So I would say, just to start off, you could say, well, we're going to have a money system, right, in order to run the economy. That money system can either it can be designed to either serve everybody in society on some sort of, fair, equitable basis, or it can be designed to serve a plutocratic elite at the top of the societal pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
And for a variety of reasons, the system we have in place is a power, wealth, and privilege centralizing mechanism. And so no matter what particular problems or questions or issues are of concern to you, the reason things are happening the way they're happening, the reason why society is going the direction in which it's going, it is, I believe, primarily due to the structure of the financial system. So social credit is one set of proposals for monetary reform, for changing the architecture of the system so that it actually works in the common interest more efficiently, more effectively, and so forth.
Right. Is there any nations or any perhaps smaller states that have attempted anything similar to the Douglas social credit system?
Well, Douglas social credit was a very big deal in Canada for a very long time, several decades. And we actually had a social credit government elected in the province of Alberta in 1935.
Okay.
And this is during the Great Depression, right? And they were elected for the purpose of implementing Douglas's ideas. Unfortunately, because Alberta is only a province, every attempt that they made to implement it was thwarted by higher authorities. So the courts or the Lieutenant Governor General. I'm going to have to take something to drink.
Sure. No, please take your time. It's interesting that it was Alberta. They seem to have always kind of had that free spirit, so to speak, of wanting to do their own thing compared to what the rest of Canada is doing. But
yes, it's got a long history, and this was another manifestation of it. So as I say, they tried to implement it, but every attempt that they made, even parts of it, somebody higher up said, no, you can't do that. You're just a province. And according to the terms of the British North America Act, you don't have jurisdiction. So some people say that, social credit, it was tried in Alberta, but it failed. But the reality is it was never tried. They weren't allowed to try it. Now, we also had 30 social credit MPs, members of parliament, in the Canadian federal parliament after the 1962 election.
okay.
So, and
This is
they
quite a
didn't
bit later.
ever form the government, but they were there in the federal parliament. Had they formed the government, then the excuse that was given in the case of Alberta would not have applied, because that would be a federal party at the level of the whole country.
Right.
British Columbia also had a social credit government for many decades. weren't allowed to implement anything, but they tried to govern as best as they could, given the parameters. Now, I should specify that Ch Douglas, the British engineer who came up with the analysis and the proposals of social credit, was actually not in favor of establishing a political party as a vehicle for implementing the monetary reform. And there are several very good reasons for that. One being, the minute you label one party social credit, you put all the other parties in the position of having to be anti-social credit.
Great point.
And he thought, well, this monetary reform is for everybody. It's not a partisan issue. Right. So regardless of who you are, whichever political party you're associated with, you should support it. This is kind of interesting. Elon Musk's Canadian grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, after he left technocracy, and we believe that the conversion was sincere, but it may not have been, he became a social creditor, and he's high up in the movement in Saskatchewan.
Okay. And
he gave a talk on the CBC in 1948 called "Social Credit versus Communism," where he was saying that, this is the Cold War, that Douglas's ideas are really the only way to defeat the communist threat. So this, as I say, in Canada, there's this long history of social credit activism. However, it has been so suppressed that if you were to talk to people today, if they're under 60, they probably wouldn't know what you're talking about.
Right.
Or they would confuse it with what's called social credit in China, which has absolutely nothing to do with Douglas social credit.
Right, absolutely. I'm going to ask you about that as well. I find it interesting. I wasn't aware of any of this history. Of course, I'm not Canadian, but you would think that we'd at least have heard of it at some point, especially with that. Both Austin and I are very interested in history and North American history specifically. Obviously, we tend to focus on American history more, but in doing all of that, I'm surprised that I've never come across it at all. Of course, I am well under the age of 60, but it's so you mentioned that Ch Douglas himself was British.
Correct.
When tell me a little bit more about him. What era was he around? Was he around in the earlier part of the 20th century when this first got off the ground, or were these ideas from much before that somebody resurrected, or?
Yeah, so Ch Douglas was born in 1879.
Okay.
And he died in 1952. He was a mechanical engineer by profession, and he had worked all over the world. He'd worked in India, in Argentina, in Canada. So he was an engineer of some standing. And through the course of his career, he kept on, well, he said that, these were sort of serendipitous events. He would keep having these interesting conversations surrounding the money question and the effect that a money system has on what you can do in the real world. And he was a major in the British Army during the First World War. And during that time, 1916, he was sent down to do some accounting analysis at the Royal Aircraft Factory in Farnborough. And it was there that he discovered that when you look at the flow of costs and the flow of incomes, everything that was being produced by this aircraft factory, the costs and the prices were being generated faster than incomes were being distributed. So the two sides of the equation were not in an automatic balance. Right. And he studied 100 other British firms, and he noticed the same pattern, that unless the firm was headed for bankruptcy, it was generating costs and prices faster than it was distributing incomes. Now, economic orthodoxy assumes that the financial system is self-liquidating, that the two sides are in an automatic balance, that when you spend money on costs, raw material, labor, real capital, what have you, it all ends up as personal income in someone's pocket as a wage, salary, or dividend. Mm-hmm. And Douglas's contention, based on the mathematical modeling, but also on his empirical analysis, was that this wasn't the case, that actually the financial system is fundamentally unbalanced. There's a lack of homeostasis built into the system just because of the way the software operates.
Right.
Right. So it's always, there's this chronic lack of consumer buying power, basically.
It's always lagging behind the production that's being made, and that's really the core of this idea, right? Is
That's
bringing
right.
these two things into balance. All right. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, before we move on to discuss, I suppose, more of the analysis and the ideas, I just wanted to point out that there was a small but significant Douglas social credit movement in the United States as well.
Oh, was there?
There was. So among the links that I've sent you, there is, for example, a book written by J. Crate Larkin, From Debt to Prosperity, which is available on Scribd. And that was written by an American, I believe, in the 1930s. And so that's sort of a resume of Douglas's ideas. Douglas was getting a lot of traction because of the Depression, right? People wanted solutions.
Right.
And also Gorham Munson, in another link that I sent, he wrote this huge book. It's a very interesting read. Aladdin's Lamp, The Wealth of the American People. That's all about Douglas's ideas. And that was published in 1945. Gorham Munson was a famous American literary critic. And Ezra Pound, right? Ezra Pound is regarded as the greatest poet of the 20th century, at least by some people. And of course, he was American. He was heavily influenced by Douglas, so much so that his cantos is replete with references to Douglas social credit. And there's a new book that has just been published. I helped to edit and prepare it, called "And the Light Became So Bright: The Influence of Ch Douglas on the Writings of Ezra Pound." So that's it's a large book. It's about 500 pages. That looks at all the various texts, not just the cantos, but various things that Ezra Pound had written that were directly inspired by Douglas. Also, let's see here. Robert Heinlein, right? Robert Heinlein is the author of Starship Troopers. He also was a social creditor. His first book that was published posthumously, his first novel, was called For Us the Living. And in that book, he actually details what a Douglas social credit system would be like in the United States. I believe it's like in 2083 or something, a future time.
Right. That's fascinating.
Yeah. So there are all these, and I'm just kind of, touching some of the more salient points, but there's all this history that's been buried. There actually, in 1932, there was a bill brought before the U.S. Congress, which was the social credit bill. It was actually legislation, they were going to introduce social credit in the United States. It's called the Goldsboro Bill. And there's some information on that in the social credit proposals explained in 10 lessons. That's in lesson 7, the history of banking control in the United States. So there's this wide social credit movement in Australia, in Canada, in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Ireland, and it has it's been buried, and the situation very largely buried, and the situation's become worse because what people now know as social credit, the CCP social credit, that is something that's only come on the scene since 2014 or so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it hasn't been very long,
right?
For sure. I certainly remember a time before it.
Right. So I think it's about 2014. So in 2013, if you were talking about social credit, the only social credit you could be talking about would be Ch Douglas's social credit, right? And then, unfortunately, the CCP has decided to appropriate the term. Now, there's debate about whether there is a social credit system actually functioning in China, or how extensive it is, or how it actually works. But nevertheless, there is something there that they call social credit. And not only is it not the same thing as what Douglas proposed, but it's actually an inversion. It's the opposite. Because Douglas's idea, and social credit is wider than just monetary reform or economics. He also had ideas for political reform, and there's a whole social philosophy behind it. In Douglas's proposal, you need to find ways to give the common citizens sufficiently weighty sanctions so that they can monitor and reward or punish the politicians, the bureaucrats, the business people, right?
Right.
So the people who hold authority in society are there to serve us. They work for us. And so we need to have effective ways of ensuring that when they do what we want, we can reward them. And when they don't do what we want, we can get rid of them.
Right.
The CCP has flipped it completely on its head, because in the CCP model, it's the party, the government, that's monitoring the citizens and is rewarding or punishing the citizens depending on how well they serve party policy.
Right, on their loyalty to communism and the Chinese party itself.
Right. So it's diabolical, really. I can't prove that they've taken the name deliberately as a way of mocking the original social credit. There's no document I can point to. However, for whatever it's worth, if you talk to ChatGPT or Grok and you say, well, what are the chances that this could just be coincidence? What are the chances that they just happen to stumble on the same term and that they decided to call their system social credit? And they'll say the probability is something like 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 100,000 that it was a pure accident.
Right.
So that would suggest there's something more sinister going on.
It's entirely possible.
In social credit lore, there was an Anglican, I think he is the Dean of Canterbury, an Anglican priest who had gone to the Soviet Union, Moscow, and he asked Molotov, of all people, who was part of Stalin's cabinet, whether he had heard of social credit. And according to the Dean of Canterbury, Molotov said, social credit, yes, we know all about that. It's the only theory in the world of which we're afraid. So,
interesting.
Yeah. So you make of that what you will. But when you have ideas that are very promising, but they're systematically suppressed and buried, and even I mean, there are people that say to us now, oh, you've got to rebrand it because the CCP has forever tarnished the name, but the name is our name and we were here first.
Fair enough.
So
well, it's one of those things, you can rebrand, but there's going to be problems that come up every time anyway, so it's not necessarily I don't think the term social credit itself didn't immediately put me off to it. In fact, the term combined with the information that it's not at all the same thing is actually what was interesting to me. The fact that there was another type of social credit system out there, because I'd never heard of such a thing. I'd never heard of social credit at all until I had heard about the CCP's variant, or I don't believe there's any other countries that have implemented, but I know there's certainly been people theorizing about wanting to implement various social credit type systems that are similar to the CCP's in making sure that the citizens are staying in line, so to speak. And one of the things that interests me about Douglas' system is I noticed there seemed to be a lot of overlap not directly, but there seem to be a lot of similar ideas. You mentioned that there's a whole social philosophy behind it, and that social philosophy seems to line quite a bit with things that the founding fathers frequently referenced. That in order to have a free society, there has to be a certain level of responsibility among each citizen. There has to be a certain level of community and, I guess, just commitment to the system in order for it to function. Yeah, and virtue in order for it to function correctly. And I noticed a lot of that with Ch Douglas as well. Maybe we should back up just a little bit. And what exactly is in the simplest terms? What is the system compared to? Rather than compare it to anything, just what is Ch Douglas' financial proposal? We talked about it a little bit, but let's clarify.
Right. So the proposals follow quite logically from the diagnosis, right? Douglas says the existing financial system, because of the way it's designed, the way it functions, it's not self-liquidating, right? It generates costs and prices faster than it distributes incomes. And the current system tries in a variety of ways to compensate for this fault without explicitly admitting that it's present or that it is a fault. But basically, the present system requires economic actors, whether it's the government, business, or consumers, to go to the banking system and borrow additional money into existence in order to make up for the lack of consumer buying power. And this is, this isn't right because and I'm going to use the word community very loosely here, but what we the people, right, in an American context, what we have paid for in physical terms, the goods and services that have been produced, if the financial system actually reflected the physical reality accurately, it should enfranchise us with sufficient buying power so that what we've paid for physically, we can pay for in full financially without getting deeper into debt. Right? So if the system reflected reality, if it was an honest system, then if we produce $100 million worth in goods and services, then we should have $100 million in income with which the costs can be met and the goods and services can be distributed automatically. The system should provide that automatically. The existing system maybe only provides $60 million in wages, salaries, and dividends, leaving a $40 million gap. Right. And so the government has to run a deficit to help fill the gap, or we have to, credit cards, mortgages, lines of credit, student loans, car loans, etc. That's another way of filling it. Or businesses try to expand and try to convince people that, to buy something sometime in the future that helps to fill the gap in the present. Another thing countries do is they try to export more than they import, right? Because and this is quite crazy when you think about it. If in financial terms you export more than you import, let's say you export $100 million worth, you only import $60 million worth, then, why would you do that? Because you're getting $40 million that can then help to fill or to help compensate for your domestic lack of purchasing power. Okay. Right? But in physical terms, in real terms, objective terms, it's actually a loss of real wealth. You're actually giving away $40 million worth of goods. You're not getting $40 million in exchange of some other goods that you can't produce or can't produce easily. You're just getting money tokens. But because there's this lack of buying power in the economy, that helps the economy to meet its survival constraint so that we can live to fight another day. Right. The only problem, however, apart from the fact that this is a loss of real wealth, it's also a zero-sum game. Not every country in the world can export more than it imports. For every winner, there's going to be a loser. So this causes a lot of friction between countries, and it sometimes can cause or occasion military interventions.
Right.
And of course, war is another great way of filling the gap.
Right.
Because none of the goods and services you produce have to be bought by consumers. They're exported to the enemy, but you're going to be distributing incomes, profits to the domestic population and to domestic companies.
Right.
And so that's,
And you're generally gaining
Yeah, so-
resources as well, at least if you win the war.
Say that again, sorry?
I said, and you're generally gaining resources as well, assuming you win the war,
Yes.
which is a big
Yeah, so
windfall.
if you win the war, then you'll be in a stronger position in the future, right? As far as international markets are concerned. So you can keep expanding that way and through expanding help to compensate for this lack of homeostasis that every economy is laboring under. So Douglas says this is silly, this is stupid, it's inefficient, it's unjust, it's irrational. Why don't we just measure the amount of purchasing power that's missing, monetize it, not with debt money, but with debt-free credit, and distribute part of it to every citizen in the form of a national dividend? This is not the same thing as a universal basic income for reasons that we can we can discuss at length. But the idea is that every citizen is rightly regarded as a shareholder in his economy. And if the economy is producing a profit in the sense that it's generating goods and services at a certain cost and price, but not distributing enough income to match what it's producing, then we can monetize that debt-free credit and distribute it to everyone as a shareholder in society in the form of a dividend. And his other proposal was a compensated price, which is sort of like a universal rebate. So if the compensated price is set at 20% in order to help fill the gap, all goods and services would be priced at 20% less of what the sellers were asking for it. Now, this is not price control, because producers are free to vary their prices in accordance with costs and market conditions. But whatever they set the price to be, there'll be a 20% discount.
So it's still a
Go
free
ahead.
market system, but with this sort of backbone or structure that is helping to keep the entire system equalized on either side. Is that a decent way of looking at it?
Yeah. So that's correct. So Douglas social credit is basically free enterprise plus an honest, functional financial system.
Okay.
Right. So we're in favor of private property. We're in favor of the market mechanism. We're in favor of competition. We're in favor of the profit motive. There's no command system, right? There's no central planning. There's no ownership of the means of production by the nation or the state. There's no redistributive taxation. Right. So if everyone's receiving a dividend and everyone's enjoying compensated prices as a result of monetary reform in the public interest, you can get rid of welfare. You can get rid of unemployment insurance. You can get rid of even public pensions.
Okay.
Right. So a lot of the social programs that we have now, which are in place to kind of maintain social stability under a dishonest, unbalanced financial system, they would be redundant. And because they'd be redundant, the taxes that are currently levied in reference to them, well, taxes would be much lower. Right? Income tax could be abolished. And also all the bureaucracies that are necessary to monitor these programs and introduce them and
the great cost
look
that
after the
comes
means
with
testing
it.
and make sure there's no fraud or corruption. All of that waste of time and energy, it wouldn't be required. So, before we had the issue with CCP social credit, a lot of people would object. I shouldn't say a lot of people, but some people would object upon hearing about social credit because it has this word social in it, and they would therefore assume, it must be some form of socialism. But I would say that a social credit economy, as Douglas envisaged it, I don't like to talk in terms of conventional left and right because I think that's it's sort of a false spectrum.
Hmm.
But if we have to speak in those terms, I would say a social credit economy would be, in key ways, much further to the right conventionally in terms of size of government, level of taxation, the power of the bureaucracy, be much further to the right than any existing economy anywhere. So I would say, while addressing a lot of the issues that socialists are legitimately concerned with, it addresses them in a way that is not only not socialist, it's anti-socialist. So we would see conventional socialism as a false answer or a false response in a sort of Hegelian dialectic where the other side is some form of monopoly, crony, financial capitalism, where in the name of freedom and the free market, you're actually concentrating wealth in the hands of monopolies and oligopolies.
Right. Okay, that was a lot to take in. I'm trying. So sticking with the not being socialism thing for a second. So I get it's not socialism because it's not centrally planned. How are these dividends and these balancing mechanisms in the Douglas social credit system, how are they enforced or determined if it's not centrally planned? What kind of mechanism balances it?
Right. So when I say it's not centrally planned, it means as far as policy is concerned, the financial system is not determining anything, right? Economic actors make their free choices. The financial system is just reflecting what they choose to do. So there's no central control over policy. Policy is in the hands of the individuals who make up society. As far as measuring the gap is concerned and creating the money to balance it, Douglas proposed that you would establish what has been termed a national credit office, right? So this would take the place of the central bank. And this office would be a body of statistical experts who would measure the gap and make sure that the money that's being created is not too little, not too much, and it's being distributed. Now, in keeping with Douglas's social and political philosophy, you would have to set mechanisms in place to ensure that if the bureaucrats who are, running the National Credit Office are not giving satisfactory results, that they can be summarily fired and replaced with others.
Right.
Right. So one of Douglas's axioms was that there's no power, there should be no power in society without responsibility. Right. So anyone who exercises power, public authority, has to be vulnerable to, without going to the extreme of, let's say, mob violence,
Right.
has to be vulnerable to public opinion not regarding technical matters, but regarding results. We want results. Is it working well? If it's not working well, you're gone. Get somebody who will make it work. So that's sort of the idea. Not just with regards to the National Credit Office, but everything. Right? Any responsibility that the government has, if they got a responsibility for the roads, well, are we happy with the quality of the roads? Are we happy with the quality of the sanitation system?
Yeah,
if not, then
that's the idea behind the American system that our founders set up. Of course, that's one of our biggest flaws and one of our biggest mistakes, I believe, that we make here in America, is we don't hold our elected leaders accountable nearly enough. We have, many Congress members across the political spectrum that have been in office for 100 years, it seems like, and no matter how many mistakes they seem to make, we are very hesitant to get rid of names that we like or are familiar with, and we're very hesitant to get rid of policy, no matter how bad the outcome ends up being. There are many policies over the last 100 years that the promises were great, but the outcomes did not come anywhere near the promises, but we are, for whatever reason, extremely reluctant to just fully do away with them and go back and start again. And I'm not entirely sure how we fix that. Of course, that's something that's, far beyond what we're discussing here. That's a whole nother societal issue. But so in it, if I understand correctly, then so you would be a more or less another elected branch of government, or in the case of America, it would be kind of replacing the treasury, but making it a little more accountable to the people. Is that right?
I would say the National Credit Office. I don't think that they would be elected. They'd probably be appointed.
Okay.
But the people would have sort of a veto. Like they'd know who these people are. They wouldn't just be nameless, faceless bureaucrats. It's like so and so,
like the treasury
is running
right
the
now.
National Credit Office. Yeah. Are you happy with him? Yes or no? And if there are different ways this could be done, but if you say, well, there's some sort of like a quorum. If 35% say no, he's gone. But that would be the idea that like Douglas, as I said, he had a whole political theory, and for him, he said the most important power in democracy is actually negative. It's the power to opt out, or it's the power to veto something you don't like. It's the power to take your ball and go home.
That's a great
and
way to...
if we actually had that power to a greater extent, then the government officials, the politicians, etc., would have to be more responsive to the common will, because they would need the cooperation of the people. So one of the things Douglas suggested, for example, is if the government wants to send money to for some social engineering in an African country, for example, then the people who vote in favor of that, they should pay for it, and the people who don't vote in favor of that, they wouldn't be taxed for it. As an example.
Okay.
Right. And so it's we don't want to, as far as like government projects are concerned, or let's say it's something not so so far-fetched or so foreign, but let's say we're talking about reforestation. Let's say there's a group of people who think we've destroyed the soils, we need to reforest Wyoming.
Okay.
Then okay, fine. The government, that's something the government can do, but then we're not going to oblige everyone to back it. If this is important, you think this is something that government should do, then you can vote in favor of it, but you will be taxed accordingly. And if you think it's a waste of money or it's misguided, whatever, then you can opt out. Right?
Very interesting.
So he said there should be we should give people the greatest leeway. Obviously, you can't opt out of everything in order to, if you're going to have a functional society, but within the widest bounds, anytime that you want government to do something beyond its basic functions, some special project, then, tax the people that want it and leave the people who don't want it alone.
Well, that's that would certainly solve many of our political differences here in the United States, because that's one of our biggest divides is there's, one side wants to do a whole host of things, another side wants to do a whole nother host of things, and we don't want to pay for each other's projects. So that's a very, it's a very interesting proposal that I'll have to spend some time thinking on that, because that could be a huge... just in and of itself, that could be a huge improvement to our societies. And then, so backing up just a hair here, when I asked you about the mechanism that governs it, so it kind of seems like the specific mechanism that governs determining, where the economy is at and whether, more dividend needs to be issued or whatever it is, how far out of scale the two sides are. It's essentially math. Math is what's going to keep it in line via the I apologize. What was the name of the branch that would be
National
created?
Credit Office?
The National Credit Office. That's right. Okay. So that makes a lot more sense then. Austin, you've been pretty quiet. Do you have any questions or anything so far?
No, not really so far. I mean, I think it's an interesting, thing, and I'm just learning.
I know that's
I wasn't as prepared as Chris, so
Fair enough. Not that I'm extremely prepared either, but we are both learning a ton right now, which I appreciate. Let's see. So the way that our system in America currently works is well, first of all, it's very different than the founders originally intended. In the during the progressive era in the early 20th century, of course, the biggest change, I think, or if we were going to point to a single thing that the progressives, and when I say progressive, I'm referring to the progressives in the 1920s, not necessarily the counterpart today, but they took the original system that the founders set up that required permission of the citizens in order to spend any debt via bonds and stuff. If the government wanted to do something, they had to come to the people and sell them bonds. And if the people didn't want to do whatever it is, they didn't buy the bonds, and the government couldn't afford to fund it. And they took that away by creating the Treasury, creating essentially a central bank, which they, went to great lengths to explain why it wasn't a central bank, but it really, that's all it was. And so, of course, now we have a debt that's blown incredibly out of proportion. And so if I understand correctly, that is kind of the way that the system balances today. That offset, right, is by printing debt.
Yeah. So on Douglas's analysis, he predicted this. If you read his books, he wrote many different books and had all sorts of speeches in various places. He actually gave evidence before the Canadian banking inquiry in 1923 and the British Macmillan inquiry in 1930. So, he was consulted. I mean, the governments were desperate for an answer. But on his analysis, because of this gap, because the system is not self-liquidating, it's inevitable. The growth of government is inevitable.
Right.
Because it's one of the main ways that we get additional money to balance the system, and not just additional money to balance the system, but also when you're trying to run an economy on an unbalanced financial system, it creates a lot of conflict, right? So you have to have all these conflict resolution organizations that spring up to kind of well, that employs more people, of course, which is helps to distribute more income and so on and so forth, but it also helps to maintain social stability. So Douglas thought that the primary driver of socialism, of bigger and bigger government, and it's astonishing how large governments have become in the last 100 years, it's this gap and the failure to fix the problem at source along sensible lines, and insisting that we try to borrow ourselves out of debt, try to balance the system by increased borrowing. And why does this happen? Well, obviously there are vested interests who profit very handsomely from this idea that to fill the gap we have to borrow more money as consumers, as businesses, as the government. Compound interest is charged on that debt, a lot of it long-term debt. And those who have, bankers and those who have financial assets are the main beneficiaries of all this interest paid on the compensatory debt that wouldn't exist if the system were self-liquidating from the get-go. Right? So it's mystifying, I suppose, not mystifying, but it's jarring for the average person to understand that the big capitalists, quote unquote, let's say, high finance, and the big government socialists are actually on the same side, right? And there's a dialectic there that they reinforce each other, and they need each other, and they serve each other's interests at the expense of the common person.
Okay.
So yeah, so it's also what drives inflation, because if you have to fill the gap with debt, then all right, it helps you to get through now in this economic period, but in some future economic period, not only will you have to fill the gap again, but you're going to have to take some of your income to start paying back the debts that you had borrowed in the previous period to fill the gap, right? So
Right.
some of the income that you now earn in this period, it can't go meet the goods and services you produce. Some of it has to pay the debt and interest on personal debt, your line of credit, your mortgage, or on government debt through taxation. So how do we, what do we do then? Well, then people complain, I cannot maintain the standard of living on this income. So they go and they ask for wage increases, salary increases, and that helps for a little while, but eventually those wage and salary increases filter through as increased prices because they increase costs.
Right.
And so we're just kicking the can down the road perpetually because we insist on filling the gap with debt money. You can't borrow yourself out of debt. Right, so it's like entropy. It's an entropic system, and we're trying to forever reestablish equilibrium, but it's not a real, genuine equilibrium that neutralizes debt. It just kicks the can down the road, increases the overall debt burden, drives inflation, and we go on our merry way without ever actually solving or addressing the problem at source. It's just symptom management.
Right. And eventually
Mhm.
as far as a country is concerned, it likely ends in war because our
Mm.
ever expanding debt, especially here in America, is going to if and when it crashes or as it continues to to spiral into inflation or whatever it is, that's going to affect all these other countries, and they're not going to be very happy about it, especially the countries that hold large portions of our debt, like China.
Right, right.
And that's really the only way to that I at least that I can see that you rebalance the scales in the system that we currently have is through war, because
Mm.
other than
Mm.
that it just continues, like you said, kicking the can down the road, and eventually you're going to have more debt than you are money, period. And what do you do at that point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the system has periodic crises as a sort of partial reset. Whether that's a financial crisis, we can wipe some debt off the ledger because people go bankrupt, businesses go bankrupt, unless they're too big to fail, or we have a war, like you're saying, and yeah, so it's the whole thing is really quite stupid. I mean, it's the amount of waste and sabotage and human suffering that's bound up in this whole story is colossal. But some people, they're aware that the financial system is a problem or an issue, and they think something needs to be done. But to my mind, no one is as clear and as correct in the diagnosis and in the remedial proposals as what Ch Douglas came up with. And he was an engineer, so he looked at it from an engineering point of view and said, this doesn't make any sense. It's technically flawed.
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah, and you can
but
you can
it would have
definitely
been
see
fixed.
that.
It would have been fixed. It's just that there are some people that profit off of dysfunction, and they happen to be the most influential, the richest, and the most powerful people in society.
Funny how that works. Um,
Indeed.
well, let's see. It's funny because there's so many different directions and stuff that I want to take you, but I want to try and keep it, fairly on point here too. The
Mhm.
one thing that I've noticed is you've talked a lot, or mentioned a lot, equity and equitable and fairness, and that is something that usually people would assimilate with socialism. We've talked a little bit about how the Douglas credit system is not itself socialism, but the founding fathers in America firmly believed that the in individualism. I mean, in that the individual is the best at determining what the individual needs are, and and responding in that sense. So I guess the question that I'm asking
Mm-hmm.
is, in what way is the Douglas credit system? Apologize, I'm having a hard time putting this into words here. In what way is it equitable? I guess we'll start there.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of Douglas's famous quotes, well-known quotes, is from his first book around 1920 that was called Economic Democracy. Right, and in that book, he wrote something to the effect of, systems were made for men, not men for systems. So the whole idea of Douglas social credit is that the individual is more important than the group, and that group activity, the only justification it has really is that it serves the individual.
Right.
Right. So there again, you've got like two paths you can take. You can take some sort of collectivistic path where you sacrifice the individual, you subordinate the individual to the group. Or you take the other path and say, no, the group, it has its meaning, it has its value, but it's there for one purpose, and that is to serve the individual.
Right. It's additive.
Now, now where does, equity come in? Well, Douglas said that, I have to take a drink of water again.
No problem.
Douglas said that, it's every individual that matters. It's not, because there are forms of individualism that sort of just give lip service to the individual, or they talk about some theoretical individual, and it's just cover for exploiting most people on behalf of a certain oligarchy. So Douglas wanted to make sure that all individuals, every individual, is served by the system, at least to a basic minimal degree. And like the national dividend is one way of assuring that. Right? In a social credit society, you still have wages, you still have salaries, you still have profits, right? Those who have certain gifts or talents, or who work harder, or who, are good at business, will excel. But everybody is getting the dividend, and it's the same amount regardless of who you are.
Okay.
So that, it's not, with welfare, one of the problems with welfare is that, I don't know what it's like in the States, but it's probably very similar. A lot of people who receive welfare are trapped in it, because the minute they start earning a bit more money, their welfare payments get clawed back.
Yep.
Right? Or they're seen as being, in violation of something. And
Yep.
so it doesn't provide them really with a platform for bettering themselves, because the minute they start to get out of the hole, they're kind of thrown back in because it's clawed back. Now, with a dividend, everyone's getting it. It's not funded through debt. It's not funded through redistributive taxation. So you're not robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're not taking anything from anybody. But once you have it, you can make more money in various ways, and it doesn't affect your dividend payment. So there's no. The other thing I should mention, we talked about universal basic income. So not only is the funding different, right? The funding of the national dividend requires monetary reform, debt-free credit to fill this recurring gap. It's not funded through an increase of debt. It's not funded through redistributive taxation. But it also, because it depends on the size of the gap, if, let's say, too many people decide they're not going to work, and, what will happen? Production will go down. And if production goes down, the gap will get smaller. And if the gap gets smaller, then the dividends will be smaller. It'll be more difficult to live off of the dividend alone. So there's like a feedback mechanism, right, built into the system. It's not the dividend is not guaranteed at any particular level.
Right.
I mean, we anticipate that in a first world developed country, it should be sufficient to cover basic needs, but it's indexed to productivity. So it's always responding to what the economy can actually justifiably afford. It depends on the size of the gap. Big gap, big dividend. Small gap, small dividend. So that's, that's another aspect, and something we haven't talked about yet, but is sort of one of the main problems and one of the advantages of the social credit system has to do with technological unemployment. So machines replacing labor in the process of production. We're talking about AI now and automation. Douglas, as an engineer, Douglas was of the opinion that 100 years ago, let's say 1926 in the UK, only 25% of the labor force was actually necessary to produce the goods and services people needed.
Right.
Right. And so there's a lot of waste in the system. You've got jobs that are redundant, jobs that are witless, useless, jobs that are destructive, but they exist because the current economic regime insists on full employment. Everybody's got to work or be dependent on someone who works. But from a realistic point of view, from an engineering point of view, this is inefficiency, right? If 20%, if 25% can produce everything, working in the formal economy, why are we insisting on a policy of full employment? Well, one reason is we have no other ways really of distributing income to people under the current system. But if you have a national dividend and compensated prices, then you can free up a lot of the population. This, we talk about leisure in a social credit context, but leisure simply means the freedom to decide for yourself how to profitably spend your time. It doesn't mean idleness or aimlessness.
Sure.
Now, to transition from where we are to there would require an educational change. It would require a cultural change. I don't think this is something we could do overnight, especially not with respect to your country, if you don't mind me saying so, because it's very ingrained in the American psyche, right? Work, work, work.
Definitely is.
And yeah, and what we want to say is there are a lot of things worth doing. There's a lot of work that actually needs to be done outside of the formal economy.
Yeah,
right? Meaningful
absolutely.
work.
Yeah.
So work, we think of work as paid employment, but work is so many other things. If you want to talk about actual profitably spending your time.
Right.
So again, the current system, the replacement of labor by technology, technological unemployment, is the thing that actually causes this gap between costs and prices, because when you replace labor with capital, you have more and more capital charges, depreciation, maintenance, financial charges, and these charges don't distribute income in full to the consumer the way a labor cost does. If you pay someone $1,000, for their labor, that's $1,000 in their pocket. But if you have to charge $1,000 to cover depreciation on a machine, that money has not been automatically distributed by the system. So someone has to go into debt in order to offset that. So the phenomenon that's causing this gap between costs and prices, and that's causing it to grow and become greater and greater, is this replacement of labor by real capital. And that at the same time, that's actually throwing people out of work and rendering the amount of human energy necessary to produce what we want, smaller and smaller and smaller. So we either adopt the financial system to the physical reality, or we try to tie ourselves up in pretzels to make the financial system work.
That makes sense. I think that that going to what you're saying as far as work being ingrained in the American psyche, and this it's hard to use a term other than redistribution, just because that's it's really the only way that we've known a system like this, until right now, obviously, for myself. But I think that one of the biggest concerns from an American point of view is creating a system like this where you're taking away the meritocracy, and you're saying that wouldn't happen, but the concern would be that you do end up with, this. You start out with most of the people working, and I agree with your point that only a certain percentage of the society is actually profitably doing something. We saw this when women entered the workforce, right?
Exactly.
We almost doubled the workforce overnight, but really not a whole lot more work was being done. It was being done before. It was just being done by twice as many people. Obviously, it increased a little bit, but not necessarily equally. But you're going to start with that, and then very similar to a socialist system where the larger that dividend check becomes, or whatever the mechanism ends up being, the more people stop working and start doing things that are not beneficial to all of society, let's say. Because I agree, there are many other forms of work that can be done that aren't necessarily jobs that pay a paycheck, that are still worthy of doing. But the more people start going on to that side of the spectrum, the less people there are to hold up the system in the first place. And that's, of course, why socialism has repeatedly failed in the past, that and horrible mismanagement. But you end up with more and more people saying, well, I'm not getting rewarded for working harder than anybody else, so I'm going to stop working harder than anybody else. And so I guess what prevents in the Douglas system, what prevents that from happening?
Yeah, so as I was saying, if you have a job in a Douglas Social Credit Society, you're going to have a wage or a salary attached to it, which people who aren't working won't get. So you'll have your dividend, but you'll also have your wage.
Right.
Right. So we're keeping all those rewards in place. The other half of it is that, there's going to be some level that's optimal, right? The right level of labor force input to produce the goods and services we need to survive and flourish. And so if we fall below that level, then production will suffer.
Right.
And dividends will become smaller, which means that it'll become harder and harder to live off of the dividend alone. So that automatically will move people back into production to the extent that is required, because they would be getting a wage, which would help them to live. Yeah. So we think it would achieve. There'd be a new equilibrium, but perhaps even more shockingly, I think Douglas's conception, this might blow a few people's minds, but and you probably get a good sense for this if you read Robert Heinlein's book, For Us, the Living. Douglas's ultimate conception is that at some point, economics will stop being so important. It will be relegated to sort of a secondary or tertiary activity, and people will move on to what we could say are cultural activities. So many centuries ago, again, this is might be a shock to some people, it's reported by reputable historians that, let's say in the High Middle Ages in Merry England, the average peasant was only working 15 weeks a year. And he enjoyed 150 holidays a year at a lower level of technology. And the sky didn't fall because they built the cathedrals and they engaged in the production of all sorts of different forms of art, and they had their community activities. So the human being would have to reorient himself, and the community would have to reorient itself in terms of what's really important in life. So what we envisage eventually is that there would be an evolution, and that it would be easier for us to survive and flourish, and we would have more leisure time, which means we would have the resources necessary to really develop that third side of the social sphere, right? We talk about like economics, economic life, political life, and then there's cultural life. And those are the things which could be scientific research, could be artistic expression. I mean, there's a long list of things.
Right.
But now I think a lot of people have been beaten down by the existing system, that they can't even conceive of this, right? Because so many people live paycheck to paycheck. So many people are ridiculously indebted. And Douglas thought that this served a political purpose too, right? If you keep people so indebted and so busy, they don't have time to think. And they don't have time to challenge the existing hierarchy, the existing oligarchy. So it's not just that they're profiting off the backs, through the debt system, but of the common people. But it's also a way of maintaining social control and keeping people in their places, which is another reason that they don't want freedom. They don't want real freedom for the little guy.
And by that you mean the oligarchy or the ruling class, wherever we're looking at. Is that's what you're referring to? Not wanting the little guy, wanting freedom. I mean,
yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So
it's an interesting thing. I do worry about, because I think that something that Austin and I have talked about a lot is I do think that work is it's very important, obviously, for particularly men to have something that they're to produce something, to be doing something. And it's not that obviously there aren't plenty of passions that one could pursue, I suppose, other than just producing. But I think that that's one of the issues that we see today here in America is, in a sense, life becoming, not that there are not many problems, but we kind of got to a point where life got so easy that a lot of men have kind of lost direction, at least here in the United States, because they weren't needed anymore. There's a segment of the population that just really wasn't that needed, and that's caused a lot of various problems that stem from it. But
right.
So I guess I'm failing to see how exactly that's fixed by this, although maybe that's not something that can be fixed by any economic system itself. But
it's interesting. I mean, you say that things have become easier, and perhaps they have in certain ways, but in other ways they've become a heck of a lot more difficult.
Sure. Sure.
If you look at like how much a man in the 1950s would be expected to pay for a house relative to his salary as compared with what's going on now, and what are the effects? What are the effects on the family formation, marriage, reproduction? The rate of reproduction is below replacement, I think, in much of the Western world. Yep. If people had larger families, there would be plenty of work.
That's true.
And I think a lot of people would like to have families and would like to have larger families, but everything seems, cost prohibitive. So it's one of the ironies. If you look at the history of how this has all evolved, it's all very sinister and diabolical, really.
I don't disagree with that.
You think about this, it boggles the mind how people fell for this. Like, women were encouraged. It was all social engineering run by the oligarchy, right? They were encouraged to go and work outside the home in the economy, paid employment. And all sorts of jobs were created for them in the bureaucracy and other things, a lot of paper pushing and crossing T's and dotting I's and not really contributing anything meaningful to anything. But it provides them with an income. Now, what happens when you both the husband and the wife, the man and the woman, both of them are earning an income? Well, the banks love that because before they could create money against the housing stock on the basis of one income per household. But now they can lend on the basis of there being two incomes per household, which means they can lend a lot more, which means that the housing prices get inflated, right? And so that's one of the things that's driven the tremendous increase in the cost of housing.
Right.
And then at the same time, of course, you need, if the woman isn't at home taking care of the children, then you need daycare. And that, and that's GDP and that's jobs and that's income. But that's another pull on her income. And then, she needs clothes for work, or maybe you need a second car, and then you need a vacation to recover from the stress. So, and then at the same time, they come home and they still have to do the cooking and the washing and the cleaning and the child raising and everything else. So are they really better off? Is society really better off as a result of all? Is this really progress? So in a Douglas social credit world, maybe we would kind of return to the way things were before, where we don't need everybody working in paid employment, and that creates a lot more room for families to start and to have larger families, and women would have a national dividend. So that means that if a woman was being abused or whatever, she'd be in a position to say, see ya. Right. A lot more easily than she would have been able to before, which is one of the arguments for getting women in the workforce. But I would say a lot of the activity in the modern economy, it's much ado about nothing. It's there was this anthropologist, David Graeber, he wrote the book Bullshit Jobs. And he talks about how in various sectors of the economy, the people that are working, they don't enjoy their work, and they're not really doing anything meaningful. It's a way of distributing income. It's a way of filling the price-income gap. But their time and their energy would be far better spent outside the formal economy. For example, having children, raising children, so there actually is a future.
Okay, so I'm seeing what you're saying now, where because there is, especially here in the United States, I mean, I don't know exactly what the federal workforce is now, but I know it's a significant chunk of the economy and mostly jobs that we were doing just fine without before they were created. Right. And so if you're kind of redistributing that in a way, maybe that's a bad term, but redistributing that energy in a way to things that are more profitable for society rather than necessarily just for the economy. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. Yeah, more profitable
for society, but beginning with the individual person.
Right.
I don't want to make it seem like I'm hitting on the women too much, but how many of them, they reach 35, 40, 45, and they went into a career, and then it's like, oh, I missed my opportunity because, I had to have a career like everyone else. And then the other aspect of this, which, I don't know how controversial you want to get, but if you don't reproduce, see, the economy under the existing system, it has to constantly grow in order to balance incomes with prices. So if you don't reproduce, because everyone's a wage slave and a debt slave, they can't afford to reproduce, they don't feel safe enough to do that, then you've got to import people. You've got to import people who will work, who, you can what's the word I'm looking for? You can burden them with debt. And so then you've got mass migration, right? Which I think nevertheless has been weaponized in the interim, but certainly that's why countries bring people in. It's to keep the economic momentum going, because nobody is reproducing at the level that is required to grow the economy domestically under the existing system. Now, if we balance the system along Douglas social credit lines, that pressure to grow would fall away, but it would also allow for people to freely decide without pressure, how many children would I like to have? And they could start a lot earlier in life rather than forever putting things off because of career pressures and debt pressures. And the economic financial environment in which we are living is highly artificial. And
Yeah.
granted, it was never perfect. It was never it was never run along the lines that Douglas thought it was. But things have devolved in the last 75 years significantly.
Yes. Yeah. I agree. I think that, especially here in the United States, that the reason I went right to the progressive areas, that's where I think most of our particular economy and our society has gone off the track starting around that time, pretty severely. But I don't know that I don't know that I'm fully on board that things are quite as hard today, but I do agree that our entire system is based on that perpetual growth, and once that perpetual growth stops, as we're facing now, you run into a serious problem because there's not more people to. I mean, it's essentially a pyramid scheme when you get down to it, because if you don't constantly bring in new investors, then everything collapses. And so I agree that that's the most likely the underlying reason for the mass immigration that we're seeing in the West, because you got to make it up somewhere. But so I guess it makes a lot of sense in that sense. I'm kind of I'm having a hard time putting things into words right now, but kind of stepping back, I can see what you're saying as far as the way in which the Douglas system it keeps it in balance with what's happening rather than some prescribed idea like perpetual growth, because with the system we have based on perpetual growth stops, we're all screwed. But with the Douglas system, if we stop growing, then the system balances itself back to whatever we're currently at.
Right.
I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but
yeah.
Okay. And then let's see.
Yeah.
Trying to think.
So is this basically like universal basic income?
Well, I would say that what the CCP has done by appropriating social credit to designate a system that is actually the opposite, an inversion of the original social credit, what they've done is akin, in my opinion, to what the universal basic income people have done. They've sort of taken Douglas's idea that people should have an income delinked from work, but they've tied it to the existing financial system. I would say maybe not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, they're not talking about monetary reform. They're basically talking about universal welfare, right? Well, just through taxation or an increase in public debt, that's how they're going to fund it, and it's going to be guaranteed at a certain level. And I think a UBI is extraordinarily dangerous. Not only is it funded incorrectly, and it shouldn't be guaranteed because it needs to be based on something real. So it should reflect what the economy can actually afford, which Douglas's national dividend does. But also, I think that with everything going on with AI and automation, the chances are very high that if something like a universal basic income is introduced, it will come with strings attached, right? It won't be unconditional. It'll be you'll get your UBI, without which you cannot live, but only on terms. It will be centralized control again. Did you comply with our demands because we are granting you this?
Right.
And whereas Douglas's idea is national dividend is a right of citizenship. You are a shareholder in the economy. Right now, your due share has been appropriated by the banking system who issued debt to line their own pockets with the interest. We want to restore your patrimony to you by issuing a debt-free credit that it's your dividend. It's as a shareholder in society.
So,
right?
Sorry. How does this work as far as borders are concerned? as far as illegal immigration and such, because of course with well, really either system that we have, whether it's socialist or capitalist, the borders are extremely important to it. Is this something that each country is going to have to implement individually and then maintain their sovereignty? Is it something where every citizen, or is it every person that's physically in the country would receive a dividend?
Yeah, so I would, I think Douglas's idea, as far as that is concerned, the dividend would be limited to citizenship or perhaps permanent residency, but it's not something that just anybody could come in and lay claim to.
Okay.
Right, and you would have to have firm borders. You'd have to protect the integrity of the border. And I think also if you had a social credit system, each country would move more in the direction of self-sufficiency, right? Whereas in the last 30, 40 years, neoliberalism, et cetera, we've had this globalized interdependency, which is now coming to kick everyone in the butt because, like Australia, for example, I have a lot of contacts, friends in Australia. They were told that, you should specialize in what you're good at. So they've been exporting minerals to China, and they neglected their own oil production, and they closed down many of their refineries. I think they only have 2 refineries left. So they are incredibly vulnerable now to disruptions in the Middle East. And all China really has to do, I'm not giving any ideas to the CCP, but all they really have to do is like blockade the continent and wait 30, 40 days. And it's all over.
That's terrifying.
Yes. So I think self-sufficiency. We don't want a closed world. We want people to be able to travel and interact and so forth.
Right.
But if each country is self-sufficient to the extent that it's able, that makes for strength. That actually makes for peace among nations.
No,
right? Less conflict. It's like good neighbors. You have to have fences, and then you have good neighbors, and everything's fine.
Right.
But if you're living on top of each other and everyone's messing in everyone else's business, it's a recipe for disaster.
I completely agree, and one of the problems I think that we've had with this, globalist push in the last 50 years is we don't all share the same ideologies. We don't all share the same. It sort of works against human nature, in that sense, to where we're trying to bring everybody together, but there's no universal through line that brings us together other than the fact we are humans and we live on Earth. And that, I don't think that's quite enough. So I think that the concept of nationalism, I think, is important, and I think a system that reinforces that is the most effective system, at least that's been thought up so far, because every attempt that we've made to come together, how does America come together with a country in the Middle East, or come together with China, for example, when there's so many fundamental differences in the way in which we live, in the things in which are important to us, in all of these things? We can work together, but that doesn't mean we can come together, if that makes sense.
And in that situation where you have so much interdependence, the only thing then that can really unify people or provide some sort of commonality becomes, it's money, the rule of money, the hegemony of money, the worship of mammon, right? Things have been so engineered that because the financial system is not an honest system, it doesn't accurately reflect reality. Money becomes the arbiter of all value, and everything ends up becoming a money decision. And so you'll sell your nation, you'll sell your heritage, you do whatever because you need the money. And it's sort of like the religion of money becomes the unifying principle. And everything else gets sacrificed on the altar of mammon.
Yeah, 100%.
And that is true. That is true in so many ways that, I'm actually giving a presentation next month where that will be the theme of the talk, just the variety of ways in which the financial system, because of the way it's structured, it says that certain things are good because it generates transactions, it generates money. But in real terms, in objective terms, what the financial system calls good is actually bad because it's destructive. Okay? So you have this metaphysical inversion of values that's going on.
Does this with this system? So I think that the probably the biggest problem it faces, aside from just educating people on what it is actual implementation. How does this comport with our system of like finance here in the United States, Wall Street, stocks, all of that? Is this something that would integrate with it, or would all of that go away with the introduction of the Douglas system?
Right. Douglas was not a revolutionary, right? We're not talking about burning everything down and starting from scratch. That usually doesn't end very well.
Not often.
So it's not a social credit is not a revolutionary system. It's an evolutionary system. So much of what you might even say the bulk of what goes on now would continue to go on, and the social credit proposals are meant to be integrated into that mesh into the existing system as harmoniously as possible. And it's something that probably would take time. We couldn't just flip a switch and go full-blown social credit, tomorrow. It would be something that over a number of years would require, a step-by-step sort of integration, where the old system, certain aspects of the old system fall away, and the social credit proposals, like the buds of a tree, are gradually coming fully online. And at the same time, of course, we're seeing how things are reacting and we're adjusting. Douglas, because he was an engineer, he was not an ideologue, right? What matters at the end of the day is that it works well. And if things aren't working, then we need to adjust. Now, he was very much convinced of the truth of his principles, but those principles can be applied by different mechanisms in different ways. And he allowed for the possibility that in different countries or at different times, you might need to tweak some of these things in order to get to the sweet spot, right? So it's very much based on feedback from reality. We're not trying to impose something on reality, some ideology of how things ought to be. We're trying to release reality, to allow reality to function with the least amount of friction. And there's a heck of a lot of friction under the, in the existing system. A lot of it, because we live in it, we don't even notice.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Well, Austin, do you have anything?
No.
It's funny because I have like a billion questions, but
Sure.
formulating them, in the spot right now is proving difficult. So, and I don't want, like I said, I don't want to go too many different places with it, but let me see here. Let me look through what I had written down here for just a second.
Sure.
So this system, it's kind of more decentralized, is what I'm understanding.
Yes. Douglas said that the problem with the existing system is that it's a monopoly of credit. Well, the problem with society is monopoly. And so the remedy is decentralization. The remedy is distribution, not redistribution, but distributing from source, right? So that everybody has a little bit of power. The safest place for power is in as many hands as possible. And it's when power is unduly, artificially centralized, that's when, we start to have some serious problems, because it's against natural law. It's against the way reality is constructed. And so those ideologies and groups that want to centralize power, centralize control over others, and the money system is one of the main ways that they they currently do that. They are going against the grain of reality, generating a heck of a lot of friction. It doesn't end well. It can't be sustained, but it can cause a heck of a lot of unnecessary human suffering in the interim.
So tell me a little bit more. You mentioned earlier economic democracy, and Douglas spoke of consumers directing production through their monetary vote, I believe is the term that was used. What exactly does that mean, and what does that look like?
Well, under the existing system, we assume that whatever is being produced, it's because it's what the people want. But most people are not aware of the fact that whatever we produce, we're only automatically getting a fraction of it in income, right? So because there's this underlying chronic deficiency of consumer buying power, cheaper goods acquire a double advantage, right? Goods that are cheaper have an advantage simply because they're cheaper. But if the cheaper goods are the only thing you can afford, then there's because your income is not what it should be, then the cheaper goods have a double advantage. And the businesses that are in a position to provide the cheaper goods, which tend, transnationals, multinationals, big conglomerates, monopolies, oligopolies, etc., they benefit from this double advantage that cheaper goods get. If you enfranchise the consumer with sufficient income so that whatever is being produced can be purchased in full without requiring anyone else to go into debt, then the consumer is in a much better position in terms of his ability to choose, right? So if he wishes, if he wants the product that's higher quality, that's going to last, like built-in obsolescence is a huge problem with many things we produce. He can get it. And the businesses, the smaller, more medium-sized businesses are in a better position to answer to preference regarding quality. Those are the businesses that would be rewarded if we had a full economic democracy. So basically, because the consumer is not duly enfranchised, the market doesn't really reflect his true wishes, but only what he can afford under the existing system. And that skews what's being produced and who's producing it, and who's getting the rewards and so on, in ways that it wouldn't if the financial system were honest, right? So so the consumer would be freed. There is this talk in some books that look at various economic systems, capitalism, socialism, mixed economy. They talk about who occupies the commanding heights of an economy. And you say, well, in a capitalist society, quote unquote, you've got business, right? The entrepreneurs and business people, they occupy the commanding heights, the private sector. And in a socialist society, you've got the government, the public sector, that occupies the commanding heights. Well, Douglas's idea was that the consumer should occupy the commanding heights, and that both the public and the private sector should be at the service of the consumer, that the consumer is king. And in order to have that, you've got to enfranchise the consumer so that he, through the dividend discount plus his wages, salaries, etc., he's in a position to buy whatever is on offer without any requirement, directly or indirectly, of going into debt in order to purchase what has already been produced.
Okay. So does this eliminate debt entirely from our society, or is it just changing how it's implemented, or?
That's a good question. So debt would still exist for production.
Okay.
Right. So banks would, Douglas was not in favor of nationalizing the banking system. There are
That's
some
good.
people, when they talk about monetary reform, they say, oh, well, we'll just nationalize the banking system and the state will run the banks and everything will be fine. From Douglas's point of view, there's no need to do that. And it's actually quite dangerous, right? Because if the only bank in town is the government bank, if they refuse a loan for your business project, there's no one else you can turn to. There's no competition.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a private banking system, you have many banks, and your situation in the States is much better than ours, because in Canada, we only have 5 major banks across the country, right? It's an oligopoly.
Okay.
And the profits are like, tens of billions every year. So in the States, you have smaller banks, regional banks. It's more decentralized. It used to be even more decentralized in the States.
Yeah.
20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And so
Slowly
Douglas
condensed.
was very much in favor of that, the decentralized provision of services, because then you've got choice. And then if you've got choice, you can keep people in the straight and narrow, right? You can prevent people from taking advantage. So banks would still lend money for production.
Okay.
Right? And that's
So lines
part of
of-
what generates the gap, the necessity of having to pay back the producer loans.
Okay.
Right? The debt that we are eliminating is the compensatory debt, the government excess business debt or consumer debt, which is currently being relied on to increase the flow of consumer buying power so that the two sides equate. So it's that chronic mountain of debt that would be eliminated.
Okay. That makes sense. So in a sense, it's, or I guess just to clarify, so it's the consumer debt that would be eliminated, and then also the money that the government is borrowing against itself or against future generation, I guess, that would go away. But the business debt, more or less, would stay.
So there
around.
would be some reduction in business debt insofar as business expansion is only undertaken or primarily undertaken for the purpose of filling the gap, like exporting more than you import. In a Douglas social credit system, you'd have enough money to buy your own domestic production, so there'd be no advantage to exporting more than you import.
Gotcha. Okay. I guess I
And
was
then we
missing
could
that
have
piece
world
of it.
peace because
Right, because
who
everybody
wouldn't
can
be
live on what they
fighting?
produce. But
Who
how
would
does
be
that
fighting?
how does that align with the wide the wide differences in distribution of resources around the world? Because we do it a lot of places, not so much the United States or Canada necessarily, but there's a lot of places in the world, they don't have hardly anything they can produce. So they have to buy things. They have to import almost everything. And so how does that kind of...
Well, I mean, we're not opposed to trade if it's goods for goods. So, for example, in Canada, what is Canada known for? Maple syrup. What is Colombia known for, or Ecuador? Bananas. Right. So it makes sense that we send our surplus maple syrup to Colombia or Ecuador in exchange for bananas, which we can't grow here.
Right.
Like that makes sense. Now, in the case of little countries like, I don't know, Vanuatu,
It's an interesting
they would have
choice.
or Kiribati, or one of these island Pacific nations.
Yeah.
I mean, I would imagine that even now, under the existing system, they would be heavily dependent on tourism.
Right.
Right. So that's something, nevertheless, that's something that they can offer to the global economy. We can send tourists, we can export tourists in exchange. They can import whatever that they require that they can't produce.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, so I think, and there's nothing, I think in a social credit world too, it would be a lot easier for countries to cooperate, regarding things that matter, because they're not under the gun. They're not fighting each other to try to get the upper hand
You get the better
in the
deal,
export
yeah.
markets to help fill the gap. So if there is a country that is in need and that, you know, is lacking something, it'd be a lot easier, even for private citizens, to get together and say, okay, you know, there's a famine in Ethiopia. Is there something we can do about that?
Right.
So yeah, I think there'd be a lot more room for cooperation,
So it kind of
not
takes
forced cooperation.
it doesn't take trade
But,
away, but it takes
yeah.
the pressure off the trade. If I
Yes, exactly,
Okay, I got you.
exactly.
That makes sense. Because it definitely, you know, here in the United States, or even just North America in general, we have basically everything we need. We have plenty of land to grow things. We have oil. We have minerals. We have more or less everything to be sustainable in a modern world. And so the idea of not really needing to export anything makes sense, but nonetheless, trade would still have to exist somehow. So that's why I was
Mhm.
wondering how that would be possible. But anyway, how is it that going back to the credit thing, how is it that new credit that would be issued, how is that not inflationary in the same way that credit, you know,
Okay.
credit being issued
Yep.
today is inflationary?
Good question. So we actually, one of the animated videos that we have is dedicated to this particular question. But in brief, first of all, you're measuring the gap, and the whole point of measuring it is not to overshoot it, not to create too much money to fill it. Secondly, the amount of money that is distributed in the dividend and the discount to fill the gap, that's going to be issued in lieu of all the additional debt money, the debt palliatives, plus, you know, favorable trade balances that are currently relied on in order to fill the gap. So if you one way you can look at it is, you know, how much is the average American getting into credit card debt per month in order to make ends meet? Well, now imagine that there are no credit cards, but the $1,000 that you had put on credit to survive is now, you're now getting a check for $1,000. That's your debt-free dividend. Right? So you're not going into debt for it. You don't have to pay interest on it. It's coming every month, and it's replacing your current reliance on the credit card. Right? So it's obviously, if we continue to have all these debt palliatives plus the dividend and the discount, you certainly would have inflation. Right? And the third thing that I could mention is that the debt-free dividend and discount are being injected to offset production loans, production debts of one kind or another. So there's an existing cost already there, and the money is being created to offset that cost and to neutralize it. Now, we talked earlier about how every creation of bank credit, let's say, you know, as the counter of a loan or a purchase, that we're, you know, new money is coming into existence, the money supply is being expanded. Well, the reverse process happens when you pay down a bank loan or a bank sells a purchase, that money, bank credit, is actually being destroyed. So you have a case, let's say, you've got a production loan, a line of credit that a producer has relied on in order to bring his goods to market. He collects money from the consumer, wages, salaries, plus the consumer's dividend, and then there's the compensated price. All that money then goes to pay down the production loan. Money and loan cancel each other out of existence. Right now, there are other things that can happen where maybe there is no loan, but the producer is replacing working capital, things of that nature. But the idea is that we're not adding money indiscriminately. And it's not debt money, which is inflationary. It's debt-free money, and it's debt-free money that's meant to offset an existing cost. Right? And so as long as you're not creating too much of it, and you're not allowing all the existing palliatives to be in operation, then we should be able to balance the economy without creating inflation. So I would say not only would it not be inflationary, it would be anti-inflationary.
Interesting. Okay, and how what so I get you're measuring the gap in order to know how much to create to avoid it being inflationary. What happens if the gap is poorly measured and you end up either creating too much or creating too little? What's the result of that? Basically, if things are to go wrong, how bad does it get?
Mm-hmm. So if the experts who are responsible for these things in the National Credit Office, if they don't measure things accurately, create too much or too late, create too little, it's going to become evident to everybody. And it would be at that, if there's too much, there'd be inflation, and if there's too little, there would be like a recession. So at that stage, people would be in a position to, it would be obvious, right? So that then it would be the right, the duty of the people to say something's not quite right with what you're doing here, because look at the results. We want better results. Either give us better results, or we will replace you with someone who knows what they're doing.
I think my biggest concern there is one, the reluctance that I talked about earlier in America, at least, to remove people that are doing a bad job, and two, in the event that it's overmeasured and basically more money is given out than was actually produced, that people will get used to that and they'll not want to bring it back into alignment because they are enjoying the extra money. And the consequences for that are so far down the line, much like we're seeing today, where we just continue to stack the debt because the consequences, I might be dead for those, so who cares? So I worry a little bit, and it's not necessarily that every system faces these same issues in various ways. Yeah. But is there anything about the social credit system that limits this problem or limits this the negative impact resulting from it?
Well, I don't know what would be gained. Like if instead of getting $1,000 a month, you got $2,000 a month, it wouldn't enable you to buy twice the amount of goods. It would just cause demand inflation, right? Unless something,
wouldn't there be
I'll give another example. Maybe we'll address what you're saying from another angle. Okay. Let's say that we've measured the gap. It's measured perfectly, or as close as is needed to get the job done. And then there's a natural disaster. There's a hurricane, or there's a volcano erupts, and a certain percentage of the national production is destroyed. Mm-hmm. Then in that case, Douglas allows for the compensated price mechanism. Instead of it functioning as a rebate, it actually could function as a tax in order to mop up the extra money that had been distributed in the form of the dividend, but which is now too much. So there's a way there where you either reduce the compensated price, or it could even go positive where it functions like a tax, and that would, for however long it was needed, remove the extra money from circulation to restabilize the system.
Okay. So I guess insofar as a deliberate choice by the people to allow things to be out of balance, you're saying the system is responsive enough that you wouldn't actually gain any benefit from it, whereas now like like I said, the consequences of the inflation and of the debt are so far in the future, even if it's just a few months in some cases, that people will still take that immediate reward now of having more money, even though it was printed, and more purchasing power for the moment, regardless of what the downside is. But what you're saying is in the Douglas system, the response of the system itself would be quick enough that you're not really going to gain any benefit by overinflating the
Right.
the value.
Right. There are built-in limits. It's sort of like I remember one person was objecting to the dividend and said, "Well, it's look at people on welfare now. Let's say they blow the money, I don't know, on alcohol or cigarettes or whatever, and and then the same thing would happen. With the dividend. But I say, well, everyone gets a certain amount of money every month. Let's say $1,000, $2,000, whatever it is. And if you blow it, that's it, because there's no more. There's nothing else. There's no welfare system. Right. So it kind of forces people to be responsible. Yes, if you'll wait a month and you'll get another check, but you'll have to learn to use it wisely, responsibly, because there's no safety net anymore of any kind. There's no EBT. What do you call the food stamps?
Yeah, EBT.
It doesn't exist. Right.
Right.
So it's you get your inheritance. You can make a wise use of it. You can make an unwise use of it. That choice is yours. But if you make an unwise use of it, you're going to feel pain relatively quickly, and there's no. Somebody might help you out, like a friend, or but the society has done what it can for you. You got your dividend, and that's it. There's no more.
Right. Well, and that's in a free society, at the end of the day, that's your choice. If you want to choose to make life hard on yourself, there's not much others can do about it, even family or whatever, other than just subsidize your living. But
right,
that is sort of the consequence of a free society, and that's something that that I think is very lost on many Americans today, that there's a lot of responsibility and consequence that comes to the freedom that we have and maintaining it, and people seem to be too willing to exchange that freedom for less responsibility. But again, whole separate issue. But what would be the realistic first steps in moving us to a Douglas credit system if we were able to convince the population?
Right. The first steps, I think, would be to could be the Treasury, draw up a national set of books. So every company, for example, by law, has to have a balance sheet and a profit and loss account. And the idea would be, let's start doing that for the country as a whole. What are the assets of the country, its productive resources, and what are the liabilities, the claims on it? Okay. That would be the national balance sheet. And then a profit and loss account. What's the GDP versus the income that's being automatically distributed? And that would give us some sense of our position. Right. So I think that would be the best way of starting, where you treat Douglas. One of his articles was called Great Britain Limited. Right. So if you treated the whole of the UK as if it were a company, and it had a balance sheet and a profit and loss account, what would the data show about our position? And once we have a sense of that, then we can move in a direction of monetary reform to improve our position. We've talked a lot about the price income gap, but another aspect of this too is that there's an artificial limit on production. Right? So there's artificial limits on consumption insofar as we're not automatically enfranchised with sufficient income to offset whatever we produce, costs and prices exceeding the flow of incomes. Mm-hmm. But there's also an artificial limitation on production insofar as it sometimes happens, it often happens, that there are real needs on the one hand for some good or service, and we've got the real resources, we have the labor, we have the technological know-how, but production does not occur to meet those needs simply because the money doesn't exist or it's not issued, right? And it's silly, really. that we allow the financial system to be in the driver's seat and for the real economy to be the passenger, right? So one of the things that's often mentioned in social credit literature is the fact that when it comes to a war, there seems to be unlimited money for destructive purposes.
True.
But in peacetime, we're told, maybe we need a new bridge or we need a new road, but no, we don't have the money. But there's a need for it, and you have the resources. You've got people who are maybe unemployed, whatever, who would work on the roads, who would, but no, we don't have the money. And under the existing system, there are structural reasons for that. But if the financial system were designed simply to reflect economic potential and economic reality, then if we have the resources and we have the need, the system should operate in such a way that the money is just a formality,
Well, but
it's a convenience.
That does assume that you're able to get the work out of the people too. I mean, I guess technology can fill that gap to some degree, but because you need the money, the resources, and the labor. So I guess it does assume that they will fill that labor.
Fair enough.
But
yeah, I mean, they'll be paid for it.
True. I think it's a fair assumption. I mean, generally speaking, that's how we've gotten to where we are because we do the labor. But if we all just sat around, we wouldn't get very far.
No, that is true. So it's shocking sometimes how people sometimes it's very serious, talking about very serious consequences, health consequences, or people even lost their lives when the goods and services that would have saved them could easily have been produced, but they weren't, because what was lacking was an accounting entry.
Mismanagement in some form or another. Yeah.
Right. So now this is the other thing. Some people, they hear all of this and they, depending on their background and, maybe even their theological proclivities, they can look at all this and say, oh, you're trying to create heaven on earth, and you're trying to immanentize the eschaton, this sort of thing. And I say, no, we're not looking for heaven on earth. We're not looking for a mathematically perfect world. We're just looking for a healthy world, a sound world. And I'll settle for 90%. The thing is, if we don't try to improve things, if we don't kind of identify what the structural issues are, not only will we not have heaven on earth, but we'll have hell on earth. In other words, we're either moving things in the right direction, bringing society more into line with natural laws, in which case society will flourish, or we're violating the natural law, deviating from natural law, and we will suffer the consequences of doing that as well. So to me, there's no choice, really. You either choose the blessing or the curse, so why not choose the blessing?
I don't see why you wouldn't, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, we either try to improve things, try to figure out what's going on, try to improve things, or we surrender ourselves to the forces of dissolution and entropy.
And it seems unfortunate that we're, or it's unfortunate rather that it seems we're much more likely to do that, at least for a period of time, than we are to make change. Humans seem to be very afraid of making change, whatever it may be.
Yeah, that's a factor. Although I do think, I mean, I can't really say, this is very speculative, but I do think that if, let's say, 10% of the US population had a solid grasp on Douglas social credit, I think that would have to force change in a constructive direction. I don't want to say, I don't want to be discouraging or whatever, but the number of people in the world today who really have a handle on Douglas social credit, it's probably less than 10.
Wow. I would imagine it's not many, but that's really little.
Yeah. I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe it's 50, but it wouldn't be large.
Right.
So, you know, so and it's not the easiest thing in the world to understand. It's out of the box thinking. You have to drop certain prejudices and look at the world in a new way. But once you understand it, it revolutionizes everything, and you can't look at things in the same light. But I think that if we could find a way to transmit knowledge, and even if people don't agree 100%, that's not even really the point. If you can throw light on the sort of issues that Douglas had identified, something good would have to come out of that if enough people knew, right? But again, how many people even know that the banks create money in the form of credit?
It's yeah. the number of people that understand even 1% of the financial system and the economic system in the United States, I fear, is not many.
Right.
Desperately little.
Yeah. And the powers that be are quite happy to maintain the population in ignorance. And it is a difficult thing because when you talk about finance, and I suppose to a lesser extent economics, you're talking about an invisible world. You're talking about intangibles, right? It's not something that you can immediately inspect in like a laboratory. You have to go into the laboratory of your mind and try to figure out what actually, makes sense. So it's by its nature, it's not the easiest thing to grasp. However, I do think that a way forward can be found. I mean, at one time, the social credit movement was a significant movement in many places. So much so that we had a government elected in Alberta, another government elected in British Columbia. So the idea can have an impact, and we are sort of in a race against the clock with everything that's going on. But I think that at the end of the day, either we end up with a dystopia, with the oligarchy firmly in control, or the people win the war, and we end up with something more along the lines of a social credit society, social credit vision. Mm-hmm. So that is the blessing or the curse. Which way are we going? But people have to know that there's a choice and understand what needs to be done to arrive at the desired
what the choice is, even. Yeah. Well, I think the good news on that front is, for a long time, it seems that, at least here in America, I can't speak for Canada, but that people really, I want to say checked out of politics, but I don't know that the society ever fully checked out of politics, but they checked out of the systems of politics. Mm-hmm. They stopped getting that deep into it, and it seems now, because of how far awry things have gone, people are starting to pay more attention again to those details and why does the system work the way it does, rather than just arguing on the surface level of things.
Right.
And so it seems that we're coming back around to a people that are a lot more involved in their government and a lot more on top of what is happening. So it possibly couldn't be a better time for reintroducing something like this.
Right.
Assuming we don't all die from nuclear war or something.
So yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, this is the tragedy. It's like the answers are there. The answers are out there. They just have to be discovered and applied. So what a tragedy it would be if, humanity is singing its swan song when there's no good reason for it.
One way or another, I do believe personally that even if things were to collapse, in the worst way possible, we'll always we'll always rebuild, hopefully without losing all information that we've acquired thus far. But sometimes it just has to be that way. I think that it has to collapse before people are willing to make significant enough change.
Yeah. People have to learn the hard way, or at least some people. Too
It
many
sure
people
seems that way.
have to learn the hard way, right? So anyway, but it's I wouldn't be involved in this if I didn't think that it was worthwhile,
Fair enough.
and Douglas said in one of his writings that the truth is like something that's at the bottom of the well, and the powers that be, they want to keep it at the bottom of the well, and our job is to try to get it to emerge from the well so that everybody has knowledge of it, can see it, and then once the cat is out of the bag, that's it. Once Pandora is out of the box, they can't put Pandora back into the box.
Right.
So I think this is why Douglas social credit has been so ignored and suppressed, because they don't want people thinking along those lines.
So I mean, you did start out by saying that you believe that this has been very intentionally misaligned and repressed to some degree. Do you think that that's something that has primarily happened in the Western world, or just here in North America, or is this something like, is there any semblance of this in Europe at all? Of the few people that...
Yeah, I don't think social credit was not very well known on the continent. It was really, I mean, there were some people in France and perhaps a few other countries that had some awareness of it, but it was really an Anglo phenomenon, right? It was the Commonwealth plus the United States. That's where it really had traction. Although apparently there was a time when a lot of Douglas's books were being translated into Japanese.
Interesting.
And he had a following. He had a following in Japan, and he actually presented at the 1929, I think it was, the World Engineering Expo, where he presented his monetary reform proposals, to other engineers in Japan. And there's reason to believe even that the Japanese government may have adopted certain aspects of his proposals, but in an inverted fashion in order to strengthen their export markets. I think like they were subsidizing in a way to win the export battle. But Douglas's whole point was that we don't need to have an export battle.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think Japan and Germany perhaps would be two places that potentially could be very fertile for these sorts of ideas, just because the Germans and the Japanese tend to have very engineering type minds, and that's the kind of mind you have to understand Douglas's analysis and proposals.
Makes sense. Well, and if it's something that the reason I asked that was, if it's something that is intentionally being suppressed, for lack of a better way to put it here, I understand it wouldn't be quite that direct or that simple, but a new market like that can bypass that in a sense, or could.
Right. Right.
Giving it
because
giving
they're
a new
fresh
opportunity. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing that I wanted to clarify too, just so that there's no misunderstanding, there are, because it is kind of complicated, and because it does take a bit of study to really understand what Douglas was saying, there have been people who probably quite innocently have presented versions of social credit which are really bastardizations of the doctrine. So it's easy to tell people, it's easy to explain social credit in this way. You say, the banks create money out of nothing, and then they charge interest on it, but they don't create the money to pay the interest. And so this is what causes the gap. But that's not what Douglas was saying at all. The gap is caused by cost accountancy conventions as they apply to real capital. The fact that when you have machines and equipment, you basically have to pay for them twice over, once for their production and a second time for their depreciation and maintenance. And so every piece of machinery is creating like a double stream of costs, but it's not distributing enough income in the process of being produced, even to meet one of those costs. And so even if interest were zero, if we got rid of quote unquote usury, you're still going to have a gap, and there's still going to be need to fill the gap. And also, I think the whole usury thing, the interest, I mean, usury is a problem in the sense, economic rent taking. Yes, people are profiting very handsomely because there is a gap and they can fill it with debt, and the debt tends to be long-term, and compound interest over time is exponential. But the banks are also spending money into the economy. I mean, they're paying wages and they have operating expenses, and so this idea that the interest is the problem and it goes into like a black hole and there's no corresponding money being distributed, it's not true, or it's exaggerated. Bank profit that is sequestered, that could be a problem, certainly, if it's not re-entering the economy. But in that, the banks would differ in no way from any other company that has retained profit. And again, we're not against profit at all. There just needs to be enough money in the system to make the profit possible without requiring people to go into debt to pay. So, yeah.
Okay. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you think is important to mention?
I think we've covered all the main bases. I mean, it's a very deep topic, and we could go on and on.
Of course.
But I think we've covered most of what I wanted to say, so that hopefully people watching this would could consider it as an introduction, and it would have some sense of what it's about after watching the show.
I certainly hope so. I definitely I have a better understanding, and I'm looking forward to spending some time later tonight really going over it in my head and trying to wrap my head around it a little bit more. Let's recap the books that you had mentioned for anyone that wants to learn further about this, as well as the YouTube page for the Institute.
Right. So I've written a number of books on social credit myself. The tome that if people really want to get deep into it, the tome is called Social Credit Economics, and that is available on Amazon, of course, but in many other places also. So I see if I can.
I'm looking for it here.
Put the link there.
That'll work.
Yeah. I've written 3 other books as well that may be of interest. There is a book, for beginners. There is a book I can recommend that was written by another American member of the movement. Since I'm talking to Americans, I like to highlight all of this. Let's see if I can find it here.
Up larger for a second.
So the woman's name was E.S. Holter, and she wrote a book called The ABC of Social Credit. There are a few things I might take issue with, but it's not a bad introduction, and that's available for free on the socred.org website, which is my website. So yeah, if somebody wanted to start off with a simple, straightforward, honest and simple outline of social credit, that's what Ch Douglas apparently called it. That might be a good place to start.
Okay.
And then there was, Debt by Prosperity, from Debt to Prosperity, which was Crait Larkin, an American author. Yeah, so there's a lot of material out there. And on that particular site with the E.S. Holter book, there's a long list of other authors other than Douglas who were, explaining social credit to different audiences. And, in Alberta and other places, there were study circles, there were journals, there were newspapers. It was really a vibrant movement at one time in a number of places. And even Heinlein's book, For Us, the Living, that's not even a bad book to start as an introduction.
That was this one, the For Us the Living.
For Us the Living. Yeah.
I got to be honest, that one interests me the most, just because the cover page there is very attractive.
It's I don't think this book was critically acclaimed by Heinlein's fans. Like it was his first work, and he really wrote it to explain social credit. So it's not, if you're looking, to be entertained, like Starship Troopers or something, it's probably not
Not quite
in
as
line
thrilling.
with that sort of. But if your object is understanding social credit, it's not a bad place to start.
All right, good deal. And then this Douglas Social Credit on YouTube, you guys have quite a video series. I think there was 40-some, 50-some videos, something like that.
Yes. Yeah. 42 videos. So if you go to YouTube and just put Douglas Social Credit, the animated series should come up.
Perfect.
And
I got that up on screen now for people to see too, what it looks like. So if you go on YouTube, that's what you're looking for. And they break it down quite nicely into little bits too, which I had much preferred, rather than one 3-hour episode. It was, covering little bits at a time, which was nice.
Right.
And then is there anything regarding yourself? You mentioned you were doing a speech soon. Is there anything regarding yourself that you want to promote?
Yes. So for anyone that's interested, the Pilgrims of St. Michael, which is the organization through which I first came across Douglas Social Credit, they're having an international conference, the first international conference on social credit, and there will be academics and non-academics coming to present papers May 21st and 22nd. So that's a Thursday and Friday in Rougemont, Quebec, which is about an hour east of Montreal. And lodging and meals and airport pickup and drop off are essentially free. They do ask for a $100 donation, but if you can't afford that, can be waived. So anyone who wants to come can contact Helen Camara. And let me see if I can get her email address here, because she's sort of the organizer. So yeah, there will be 2 days of study on the Tuesday and Wednesday before. And then the conference will be the Thursday and Friday. And we have some people coming from the American Monetary Institute. And, you don't have to be a social creditor. Anybody is welcome. Full disclosure, the Pilgrims of St. Michael is a Catholic institution or group of Catholic lay people, but you don't have to be Catholic either. It's open to everybody.
Good deal.
And let's see if I...
Is that the Pilgrims of St. Michael? Is that similar to like a Knights of Columbus here in the United States? Are you familiar with that?
Yes. So it's, I suppose it's similar in some respects. It's a lay organization, so it's not a religious order. It's not like the Franciscans or the Dominicans or the Jesuits or anything like that. They've been in operation for, 65 years. Officially, as the Pilgrims of St. Michael. There was an organization previous to that in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And in the 1950s, the Pilgrims of St. Michael had a large following in Quebec, so much so that they, around 1955, for their annual Congress, they had like 5,000 people attend. And many people have given their lives in the movement and for the sake of the social credit cause. So some people, they entered when they were 20, and they stayed there until they died at 80 or 85 or whatever. They don't take vows or anything, so they didn't have to stay.
Right.
But they were that dedicated to the cause. And yeah, if it weren't for them, I never would have found out about it. So I,
It's very admirable.
I do owe them a debt of gratitude.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
They believed in it that much too, especially in what
Yes.
seems to be a very uphill battle.
Yes, that's right. It is a very uphill battle, but it didn't stop David against Goliath, so I don't suppose we have much of an excuse.
Fair enough.
So that's Helen Camara's email is there if anyone wants to contact her interested in coming. And yeah, I think that's everything that I had to say for today, anyway.
All right, Austin, you want to tell them where they can find you real quick?
millertalk.substack.com and millertalk_pod on X.
All right, and you can find this show x.com/JBU_show, rumble.com/user/just between us because we couldn't get a smaller URL. And of course, we're on YouTube and Twitch and all of those good things. Dr. Oliver Heydorn, I appreciate you being here and answering the questions that we have, and hopefully we'll have you again sometime.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it greatly.
All right. And with that, my name is Chris.
And I'm Austin.
Hey, there we go. And this has been the JBU Show.
Bye, 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 bye. Wait, I want to be a little bit louder.
Yeah.
This is only between us.
This is just between us.
This is just between us.
Perfect. 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 Perfect.